I'm back to look at how the situation in Canada is developing now that we have a massive protest in the form of this freedom convoy that's rolling to Ottawa, our nation's capital, as I'm recording this on the 27th of January. Let's see what our Prime Minister, Justin Trudeau, has to say about it.
The small fringe minority of people who are on their way to Ottawa or who are holding unacceptable views that they're expressing do not represent the views of Canadians who know that following the science and stepping up to protect each other is the best way to continue to ensure our freedoms, our rights, our values as a country.
Son of a... Okay, so here's the thing. You don't know what Canadians think. You don't tell Canadians what they think. You certainly have tried. Since the beginning of this pandemic, you've just fed us a bunch of nonsense. You've told us what you want us to think. You're incredibly out of touch, and you have no idea what the people really want. Or rather, you're being willfully ignorant of it. You're ignoring it. Fine quality for a leader in the true north, strong and free. With all of this evidence that's mounting every day that the virus is becoming milder and less deadly, and that your solution could pose as much of a problem, or possibly a larger problem, than the virus itself, with harmful side effects, with myocarditis, pericarditis, with rampant blood clots, with functional neurological damage, menstrual cycles being completely thrown into chaos. Just pure coincidence, huh? It's stunning, absolutely stunning that you have the audacity to pretend that A, the Canadian people are stupid, B, that we can't see or read or hear what's going on in the rest of the country, or indeed in the rest of the world.
From the start of Thursday next week, mandatory certification will end. We will end the compulsory use of COVID status certification in England. The government will no longer mandate the wearing of face masks anywhere. Mr. Speaker, Mr. Speaker, from tomorrow we will no longer require face masks in classrooms. In the country at large, we will continue to suggest the use of face coverings in enclosed or crowded spaces, particularly when you come into contact with people you don't normally meet, but we will trust the judgment of the British people and no longer criminalise anyone who chooses not to wear one. On Monday, we reduced the isolation period to 5 full days with 2 negative tests, and there will soon come a time when we can remove the legal requirement to self-isolate altogether, just as we don't place legal obligations on people to isolate if they have flu.
After 548 days of COVID curbs, Danes are living like it's 2019.
No restrictions whatsoever. That's nice.
It's really nice to have my sort of like social life back.
A country of 5.8 million people with around 500 new cases each day, more than 80% of the population aged over 12 is fully vaccinated.
And as a consequence, we have the pandemic under control in this country and can therefore handle whatever remaining of those who still get infected within the frameworks of our hospital system.
A vaccine passport was introduced in March this year. Now it's no longer required for entry into venues, including nightclubs. Masks are only mandatory at airports, and today a sold-out concert in Copenhagen will welcome 50,000 people.
You don't think the response of your nakedly totalitarian federal government is making things worse? You don't think it's obvious at this point that your COVID response is purely agenda-driven, rather than safety and health-driven? Really? You think the entirety of the world is going to ignore reality and take you at your word that you're working in the best interests of the most vulnerable among us? Define most vulnerable. Would you consider unemployed, destitute, homeless people amongst vulnerable? Well, congratulations, you're manufacturing the problem that you insist you're trying to address. I'll use myself as an example. Because of your COVID mandates, I can't fly to work, but my employer says they're not going to lay me off. Why? Because there's work available, but I need to be vaccinated for it. So in the meantime, I'm on an indefinite leave of absence without pay, preventing me from collecting EI insurance, and I've received no callbacks from my 50+ work applications. So don't know how I'm going to make my rent next month, or even buy food for that matter. Guess I'll die. In my previous video, I highlighted the COVID responses from governors in free states down south in the US, particularly South Dakota, Tennessee, and Florida. I showed how those leaders weighed all considerations when crafting their COVID response policies. They finally settled on respecting their citizens' rights and freedoms, like being able to travel freely, like the right to remain employed and actually earn a living, their medical privacy and their bodily autonomy, and the right to make decisions for their own health and for the health of their own children. Also, their right to assemble freely, like at church, so that they wouldn't end up like this poor gentleman.
Shame on you guys. This is not communist China. Don't you guys have family and kids? Whatever happened to Canada? God keep our land glorious and free. What are they going to do when they come for your kids? Shame on you guys. You call yourselves Canadians?
So much freedom. Meanwhile, what was your response?
As with climate change, those who have the least are impacted the most. But in the long run, we also have to fix the system so that it works for everyone. This is our chance to accelerate our pre-pandemic efforts to reimagine economic systems that actually address global challenges like extreme poverty, inequality, and climate change.
Your response was just all the virtue signaling about how your government is spending hundreds of millions of our taxpayer dollars.
On Friday, I announced that Canada will provide $440 million to the COVID-19 Vaccine Global Access Facility, including $220 million to the Advanced Market Commitment to help low and middle-income countries access vaccines. Last week, our government committed to investing more in international development while supporting developing countries on their economic recoveries and resilience. And on that note, today, I can announce that Canada will invest $400 million more in humanitarian and development funding, which will go directly to trusted partners on the ground fighting COVID-19. Our government is committed to investing even more in the years to come.
Overseas and abroad, to make sure that other nations, developing countries.
We will also work on ensuring the special needs of small island developing states and other vulnerable countries are taken into account.
And those who are most vulnerable are receiving aid and vaccine doses.
Building back better means getting support to the most vulnerable while maintaining our momentum on reaching the 2030 agenda.
While your own people suffer, not because of the COVID virus, but because of your response to the COVID virus.
This pandemic has provided an opportunity for a reset for sustainable development and the SDGs. Canada is here to listen and to help.
But hey, all of us unvaccinated are just unclean, unwashed, uncouth, unbelievers, right? We're all just a bunch of misogynistic, racist extremists, right?
Oui, on va s'en sortir de cette pandémie par la vaccination. Puis on en connaît tous des gens qui sont en train d'hésiter un petit peu. On va continuer d'essayer de les convaincre. Mais il y a aussi des gens qui sont farouchement opposés à la vaccination.
Ils sont extrémistes.
Qui ne croient pas dans la science, qui sont souvent misogynes.
Meine Arbeit für richtig hältst. Ob du glaubst, dass ich fleißig gewesen bin, dass ich gearbeitet habe, dass ich mich in diesen Jahren für dich eingesetzt habe, dass ich anständig meine Zeit verwendet habe im Dienste meines Volkes. Gib du jetzt deine Stimme ab. Wenn ja, dann tritt für mich ein, so wie ich für dich eingetreten bin.
Yeah, apparently right. So what's the reason for being so fixated, so obsessed with these draconian measures? Why do you insist on being unconstitutional and unsafe with your unnecessary policies? Why? Why? Could there be some other reason for maintaining such a rigidly dictatorial policy? Could there be some kind of stake that the federal government under Trudeau has? And why would you want to maintain this continually deflating COVID narrative? It's a good question, isn't it? Off to the internet I go. No. So as it happens, a biotech startup company in British Columbia, or BC, our westernmost province, it's where Vancouver is, has developed technology used in the Pfizer-BioNTech vaccine. Isn't that interesting? UBC-grown biotech leads global pandemic efforts, April 26, 2021. Millions of Canadians have received the Pfizer-BioNTech COVID-19 vaccine, but what many may not realize is that a key component of the injection was developed right here at UBC. Aquitas Therapeutics, a UBC spin-off company co-founded by Dr. Peter Cullis, developed the lipid nanoparticle technology that allows the Pfizer-BioNTech mRNA vaccine to enter human cells. 2 years ago, I thought I had reached the apex of my career when we developed a medicine for a genetic disorder that works extremely well, says Dr. Cullis. But to have this sort of thing happen, it's like a 1 in a million possibility, and the impact that it's having. It's putting Canada on the map for making an enormous difference to global health. Isn't that interesting? Precision nanosystems, developed through a collaboration between Dr. Hansen and Dr. Cullis at UBC, is leveraging its cutting-edge biomanufacturing platform with support from the federal government to build one of Canada's first large-scale manufacturing facilities capable of producing mRNA vaccines and other genetic medicines domestically. Isn't that even more interesting? So the federal government of Canada has a financial stake in the Pfizer-BioNTech vaccine? No, maybe the federal assistance wasn't actually funding. No, maybe it was a crisp high five and some strong words of encouragement. Yeah, no, obviously it was funding. What a smart investment, with an estimated 4 billion doses to be manufactured this year. Pfizer and BioNTech maintain production estimates of 4 billion COVID-19 vaccine doses in 2022. Pfizer and BioNTech expect to produce 4 billion doses of their COVID-19 vaccine in 2022, regardless of whether the current vaccine or a new Omicron-specific vaccine is needed. With Pfizer, BioNTech, and Moderna earning $1,000 per second. Yes, you heard that right. $1,000 per second. The estimated combined profits of all three companies is approximately $65,000 a minute. Pfizer raises COVID vaccine sales forecast to $36 billion for 2021. That's a lot of shekels. Gee, I wonder how much of that money Aquitas and the Canadian federal government collect. I think this calls for an investigation, don't you? How much does Aquitas earn from the jab? How much does the federal government stand to gain from the jab? Considering all the science shows that Omicron is as mild as a common cold in most instances, and itself isn't causing excess hospitalization.
Different narratives in terms of whether we need to worry about this or not. A lot of the people who are testing positive, of course, are not sick. And this is an incredibly important message to get through. What we have right now is a very high number of positive PCR tests, but the hospitalization rate actually is fairly flat, as is our ICU rate. And again, it's what the expectations are. And so I think for the province, one of the things we need to start reporting really accurately is whether or not people are being admitted because of COVID or just with a positive test, because of course everybody gets screened. Anybody with screen positive is reported as an admission. And we also have to be very realistic. It's never going to be zero. It's respiratory tract season. And so for me, it's always been that balanced approach. I'm actually a lot less worried about cases in the community who are not actually unwell, and saying we've actually achieved what we needed to achieve in terms of dramatically reducing the risk of severe disease and hospitalization. And it's for me time to pivot from testing every asymptomatic person in the community, which isn't really leading to very much. We've got a very vaccinated population. We've got a high degree of protection against severe disease, and shift entirely to focusing on how many patients are being admitted to hospital because they are sick with COVID. And that's a very different number. And if you look at that, it's also a much less alarming number.
Okay, so I did want to make it very clear, though, in terms of what you're saying and seeing that in terms of the positive cases, people aren't as sick as they were perhaps with Delta. This is due to vaccinations. Is that correct?
Well, I mean, if we look internationally, this strain Omicron is significantly, everything we're seeing from every other jurisdiction is less severe than the others. And there are a variety of reasons why this may be. But what we're clearly seeing, countries with high vaccination rates, countries with low vaccination rates, that it's simply not as severe. It is much more of, well, you've seen the headlines saying, how do you know if you've got a cold or if you've got Omicron? The fact that you're even asking that question, whether you've got a cold or an Omicron, tells us that it's pretty mild. And so for the vulnerable adults who are always at risk of severe disease, I think the vaccinations have made a dramatic difference in reducing the risk of being hospitalized. And that is a very important message all along. The single most important and powerful thing that the vaccines have provided is that reduction of severe disease and hospitalization and the risk of dying from COVID. And this, again, is an important message because I don't think some of us vaccines don't make a virus go away. They stop severe disease. And I think that's the message and the balance that we have to try to achieve in our communication.
So then how much more important now are booster shots then?
I think I was very happy with the NACI recommendations, the National Advisory Committee on Immunizations, that the group that is going to benefit by far and away the most from a booster are those who are vulnerable already. So our seniors, people in congregate care settings, people with a lot of comorbidities, that group for sure is going to benefit. And the additional benefit from a booster for low-risk people, that's probably an individual decision on how risk-averse a person is. We've certainly made them available for anybody who would like to have a booster.
I did want to ask you, though, about children because they cannot be vaccinated under the age of 5. What can parents do to make sure that they stay safe, whether they're at home or at daycare? Because we have seen that they are able to transmit the virus and that we are still not sure, from my understanding from the experts we've been speaking to, whether or not somebody might have a more severe case of Omicron.
So nowhere in the world, including Canada, this is one of the good news stories of the COVID, is that children themselves are very unlikely to have severe disease. And interestingly, they're actually less likely to transmit it. And there's a lot of hypotheses for that. Not that it'll never happen. And so honestly, the advice is the advice that we were given all along. If a person is unwell, they have symptoms, that person should stay home. And that person should stay away from small children. If a person is a high-risk adult, and by high risk I mean at high risk of severe disease, and that again is our vulnerable seniors, people with the significant well-known comorbidities, that person maybe wants to take more precautions of where they go out and about. But again, it's that balance of how do we ameliorate the risk of COVID to our high-risk population with actually everything else that we need to get on with and do as a society, because it's not COVID versus nothing. is COVID versus health and well-being in every other aspect of our physical health, our mental health, our social health. And that's the balance I think we're all trying to struggle to find at the moment. And for kids, we can't keep...
I think we should just go back to normal. And I think the best way to go back to normal is to just go back to normal. Let's finally leave this cult of the branch Covidians aside. Let's leave the hypoxia-causing, bacterial culture-growing face diapers aside. Let's leave these ceaseless, unending jab mandates aside. What is your limiting factor? At what point are you going to say we can't jab people anymore? Some countries are up to 3, and Israel's study on Omicron shows that 4 jabs isn't enough to prevent it.
Your intellect is as weak as your dollar. Failure is your destiny. You disrespect yourself and your nation. You are made of stupid.
Surely 5 jabs will be enough. 6. 7? Why stop there? 8, 9. You know what? Let's make it an even 10. But maybe the 11th one would be the one that really ends the pandemic. Or 12? Make it a baker's dozen, just in case the last one doesn't work. Let's go for 13. It seems to me that there was never once, and there's continuing to not be any, consideration for Canadians' mental health, or Canadians' physical health for that matter. At what point in time did anyone advise people to shore up their levels of vitamin C and D, to get plenty of exercise, to get plenty of rest, to drink fluids? Why hasn't people shoring up their own natural immune systems entered into the conversation at any point in time? You'd think that would be kind of important with a virus, right? There was also never any concern for the economy, for the economic health of this country, or for the financial health of Canadian citizens. The prospects of millions of people have been decimated. Any positive hopefulness for the future has been taken from them. We have to course correct. Now, yesterday, we are beyond the point where we should have ended this. Maybe we can recover some semblance of that which was taken from us completely unnecessarily. This biomedical security state that certain bad actors are trying to institute is completely unacceptable. This tyrannical dystopian nightmare has to end. Now. With the Freedom Convoy rolling into Ottawa, with the Honourable Brian Peckford's lawsuit proceeding very soon, if it hasn't already, against the federal government for continuously violating our Canadian Charter of Rights and Freedoms.
Because he has serious concerns about the policies of the current Canadian government in relationship to the Canadian Charter of Rights, which was established as part of the Constitution Act in the 1980s. And he, as I said in the bio, is the only living minister who participated in that constitutional process and is therefore a unique, let's say, historical and current resource because he can help illuminate Canadians as to the intent of the people who were instrumental in drafting, writing, and agreeing on all of those fundamentally important accords. So let's start by talking about what concerns are driving you to re-enter the political discussion at the moment.
Well, primarily it is the Charter of Rights and Freedoms, especially those freedoms and rights that are in sections 2, 6, 7, and 15 of the Charter, which I helped craft. And they're freedoms of association, freedoms of expression, religion, conscience, freedom of assembly, freedom of association, that's in Section 2. Section 6, freedom of mobility, the right to travel anywhere in Canada or leave Canada. Section 6 deals with life, liberty, and the security of the person. And Section 15 with equality. Every Canadian is equal before the law. As we sit here today, those provisions are being violated by all the governments of Canada, but in particular, in my case right now, the federal government of Canada, and I'm about to launch a lawsuit against the federal government because of these mandates, especially their travel ban.
I hope and I pray that this nightmare will finally come to an end, that we'll finally get some resolution to this insanity, and that we can finally sing our national anthem, particularly the line about us being the true north, strong and free. Trudeau needs to go.
People should not be afraid of their governments. Governments should be afraid of their people.